Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for January 12th, 2024. It's Friday, so I'm taking your questions, and most of the questions I received revolved around the two major issues I've been discussing this week. First of all, the International Court of Justice hearing, which opened yesterday in The Hague, and secondly, the protests underway in Germany, led by farmers against the European Union and the German government's depopulation policies. Let me just say in preface on the International Court of Justice, here's my suggestion. Watch the hearings. Yesterday's hearings have been posted widely on YouTube. You can find them all over the internet. An extremely powerful case was presented by the South African prosecutors. And to be fair, I would argue that you should watch again today when the Israelis present the rebuttal. But the volume of evidence and the tight construction of the case and the presentations were quite powerful and emotional and represented a shift in what we're getting internationally of discussion of this question of genocide. Secondly, on the German tractors, they're continuing to roll. There are demonstrations continuing yesterday and today, thousands of tractors in major cities, and it's a peaceful protest, and the result is that it's undermining the authority of the German government, which has been, as Helga Zepp-LaRouche repeatedly said, the worst government in Germany since the end of World War II. So these are the two topics that will take up most of the discussion today. Now, the first question was not really a question, but an accusation. Someone wrote and said, isn't what the South African government doing a defense of Hamas? Aren't they just speaking on behalf of Hamas? Well, that's the argument that Israel will probably present today, that if you don't condemn, if you condemn what Israel's doing as genocide, then you're supporting what Hamas did on October 7th. And therefore, you're presenting an anti-Semitic approach. This is just not true. The fact is that what happened on October 7th has been widely condemned, including by the South Africans who presented the case. However, nothing that happened, and this is in the Genocide Convention laws, nothing that happened justifies the policy of revenge that's being carried out by Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. What was presented on the genocide charge is quite specific and clear, with over 23,000 dead and 7,000 missing so far, the vast majority of which are women and children. Secondly, the policy of forced evacuation, that people are being given orders to leave, and then when they leave, they're being attacked, and when they arrive at the so-called safe zones, they're also being attacked. So there's no safe places left in Gaza. The whole territory is being leveled, the buildings destroyed, the infrastructure destroyed. 85% of the population has been displaced with no shelter, clothes, or sanitation. Finally, there's hunger, there's dehydration, there's a spread of disease, a destruction of the healthcare system. All of these are presented in a way that defines what is meant by genocide. Now, the second point is whether there can be presented evidence that this is the intention of the Israeli attack, the Netanyahu attack. And they have a long list of quotes, some of which were presented in the hearings. Quotes from Netanyahu himself, referring to from Samuel in the Bible, the attack on the Amalek, that the Israelites were told to smite the Amalek, destroy all they have, and spare them not. So the Netanyahu's commitment to that was stated and shown. But secondly, statements such as all are guilty, that all of the Palestinians are responsible, that there are no innocents, made by the president of Israel, made by the national security advisor of Israel, These kinds of comments demonstrate the intention to wipe out a people, to carry out an ethnic cleansing. And so the issue in this is not a defense of Hamas, it's a defense of international law. It's a defense of humanity. And that's being presented very powerfully by the South Africans. As I said, I will wait to see how the Israeli side counters it. But I'm not sure that it will measure up to an adequate defense other than to say that if you support this, you're supporting Hamas and you're anti-Semitic. Now, the next question is, well, what can the International Court of Justice do? Well, they can issue an order to end the fighting. They can say that actions that are undermining the ability to stay alive, end the actions that are threatening lives, for example, the cutting off of food, water, and fuel, that these have to be ended. Now, this is whether they find Israel guilty of genocide. Commentators are saying this may take months or years, but they can issue an order quickly because of the damage that's being done by the policy. They can issue an order to end the fighting. So then the question is, can it be enforced? Well, the answer to that is, what will the United States do? If the United States were to say to Israel, you must stop, then we would have an interesting situation. What will Israel do if the U.S. does that? Europe will probably fall in line behind the U.S. So if the court issues this demand or this injunction against the war, what will the U.S. do? Now, Blinken has been telling the Israelis, kill fewer people, commit a little less genocide. That isn't international law. That's a diplomatic cover for Israel. What if the order comes out to stop the war? What will the U.S. do? And some of that depends on what the American people say. That's why we should make sure that people watch this and pay attention to it, because there is genocide being committed in front of the world right now. And it's a policy directed from the government of Israel. And it's being opposed increasingly by not just countries in the global south, although that's important because it shows that the global majority is against this kind of war. But it's also opposed by people within Israel, by American Jews, by many people who are realizing that the disproportionality of the Israeli attack on the Palestinians has nothing to do with defeating Hamas, but everything to do with ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And this gets to the question of what credibility does Tony Blinken have talking about the rules-based order if the U.S. would refuse an order from the International Court of Justice. So one final point then is, well, if the fighting is stopped, what happens next? That's the issue that's going to be determined. The issue is not a political one. Will the Palestinian Authority be put in power? Will there be an international body? The question is, will there be an intention not just to rebuild Gaza, not just to rebuild the health infrastructure and the roads and the schools and everything else, but the deeper question, will the UN Resolution 242, which guarantees a two-state solution, which would include the principles from the Oslo Accord of economic cooperation to allow a Palestinian state to be successful, will that be the goal of the international community? And this gets to the whole question of the Chinese peace plan and the idea that the Belt and Road Initiative can be extended into the region. So there are many, many questions here, but the most important one is, will the world stop the genocide going on in Gaza? Now, a second group of questions, what's the reaction of the German government to the protests? Is there any possibility that they'll change the policy? Well, we'll see. Their main response so far has been panic, to attack the protesters as peasant mobs to warn that there are right-wing extremists that are involved in the tractorcades. Well, answer me this question. What's right-wing extremism about the farmers wanting to provide an adequate supply of food at affordable prices? How is that right-wing extremism? The fact is that the farmers are very clear in what they're demanding. They're very direct in saying that it's the policies of the government, the green policies, the regulations, the sanctions against Russian oil and gas. These are driving the prices up and making it difficult for farmers to produce their crops. And they're demonstrating not just on behalf of farmers, but on behalf of all the people of Germany, and I should say all the people of the world, because Germany is one of the important food producer, as are other countries in Europe that are experiencing the same kind of attack on agricultural producers. And so the farmers are not just saying, help us, they're saying, help yourself. And when you have people like Habeck and Baerbock from the Greens, when you have Lindner from the FDP attacking them, all it's doing is increasing the isolation of the German coalition government from the voters of Germany. And so I think as this demonstration continues, and on Monday there'll be nationwide demonstrations again, I think we'll discover at that point how effective the farmers have been at getting across their message. And it's an important message, not just in Germany, but for the world. Finally, let me take up a question which I found kind of interesting. Someone wrote and said, I noticed that from time to time you feature a book that you're reading that is relevant for what you're saying. Can you recommend a good book on the crisis in the Middle East? Well, I just started reading a book by Rashid Khalidi, who's a very well-known scholar and author, titled The 100 Years' War on Palestine. The subhead is important: A History of Settler Colonial Conquest and Resistance. What I've read so far is it's an absolutely clear indictment of how the British rigged the situation so that it would be exactly what we're seeing today, a permanent war with no resolution. He begins with the Baler Declaration, and what he says about that is important. It's what we always say, what LaRouche insisted, that the British policy was not about land, it was not about oil, it was not about what is usually ascribed to the empire. It's about the control of trade routes, the control of trade generally, which means currency. That is, it's a British imperial policy of geopolitics. And geopolitics essentially boils down to divide and conquer, to make sure that no nation can emerge which can interfere with the business of the empire. This is also known as the Wolfowitz Doctrine, the post-1992 U.S. policy, which says we can tolerate no rival. The U.S. is the sole hegemon running a unipolar order. Now, Khalidi doesn't say that, but that's the implication from his evaluation of what the British role is. He's not an apologist for the British, and he's not talking about the British to apologize for either the mistakes made by the Zionist movement or the Arab population. But he's identifying the truth, that the British were there not out of altruism, but to prevent the potential trade routes that would be realized today through the Belt and Road Initiative and the Maritime Belt and Road, to prevent those from occurring, to sustain the power of the empire over world trade and finance. So I would heartily recommend the book. As I said, I haven't finished it. I'm looking forward to reading the rest of it this weekend. But it's a very good starting point for getting a picture of what's going on. That's the background story to this war that's taking place. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for your engagement. I'll put a link to from a YouTube to the South African prosecutor's statement, as well as an important link to Helga Zepp-LaRouche's 10 fundamental principles, which provide the background, the philosophical and economic background for how to achieve peace in our divided world. So thanks for joining me. See you again next week.